Welcome everyone to the DLH Talkback with Last Chance Transplant, which is now streaming on Discovery Plus. I'm Tenaya Wallace, and I'm so excited to be here today with the show producer and co-creator Shannon Powers, with David Hale, who's the Executive Vice President of Programming for the production company 44 Blue. Rockin' Robbins Productions was the other co-production company along with this. And also with us is Dr. Jonathan Menachem, who's a transplant cardiologist from Vanderbilt. And that is obviously the prestigious transplant center where this docuseries takes place. Thank you guys all for being here today.
Of course.
Having us.
Yeah, this was, Shannon, you and I have had some conversations, and what I said to you was, oh my God, this was amazing. I can't believe that someone actually got a transplant non-scripted docuseries actually up and running. There were so many times that production companies come to us and it logistically just seemed impossible. And you figured it out, how to get this done. How did this concept of Last Chance Transplant come about? And tell us a story about how you decided to focus on the world of transplantation.
So I've been a casting director and producer in the field for 20 years now, and I've worked on a lot of amazing shows for every network you can imagine, every production company you can imagine. And I've always worked on fun shows, exciting shows, entertainment shows, but I decided that when I had my opportunity to tell a story that I've had my hands in and created, I wanted it to be something that would be transformational, would leave a mark in the community, that would do some good. And I was just kind of always on the lookout for that. And it's a very organic story of how it came to be. I was at the dog park visiting with a friend that I met at the dog park. And I asked her simply, what do you do for a living? And she says, well, I'm a transplant coordinator, a heart transplant coordinator at Cedars-Sinai. And of course, I'm like, oh my God, spinning. Hadn't seen anything like this on TV, a lot of medical shows, but nothing like this. And it just touched me. I had always thought about the donor side and the recipient side and the feelings that come into it. How does it happen? How does it work? How do you find these organs? And I went to Dan Snook, my other partner, who was about to start working for 44 Blue. And we knew that was, we had to make sure that this went to a production company that knew how to tell stories like this, that knew how to, that had a reputation in the medical community that we felt really comfortable with, that they could tell the story, we could hand it off and let them do their magic. And that's how it got to 44 Blue. And they did a tremendous job with it. Like, they took it and ran with it. And it wasn't an easy process, David. It was a 3-year process to get it done, but that is organically how it came to be.
Yeah, I was thinking about it the other day, because if, it kind of produced at the end of 2020 into the beginning of 2021, and then eventually premiering in mid-2021 on Discovery Plus. But Dan started with us and you started working with 44 Blue around that time at the beginning of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And so you guys had formulated this as before you had started with 44 Blue. So it just really goes to show how long the gestation of these sorts of projects can be.
I just really thought it was an important story to tell. People don't understand this world, and finding partners with Vanderbilt, it just came together so beautifully, and that's how it came to be.
I love that it started with a conversation and really an inquiry, right? Where somebody tells you what they do and you're like, oh, what does that mean? And then they explain what a transplant coordinator for a major transplant center does. And your mind and wheels are just going of how you could really tell this story so beautifully, which you did. David, when Shannon talks about 44 Blue being the perfect fit, you guys are really, you're behind so many of all of our favorite non-scripted docuseries shows. Pit Bulls and Parolees on Animal Planet, Jailbirds on Netflix, Real Murders of Atlanta, Wahlburgers. These are the ones that people really talk about when you're talking about this genre. What do you look for when you're looking for compelling non-scripted television series, and what do you think makes a docudrama successful? And finally, in comparison to your other shows, how is Last Chance Transplant the same, and how is it really different from other shows?
Right. Well, look, as far as like what we look for, you know, as we're all basically storytellers, right? So you're just looking for great stories. And I think the kind of couple of classic components that most people would talk about are stakes and characters. And so with the stakes, you know, one of the things that we loved about this show as it related to some of our other kind of buckets we've worked in with access-based docu-series, whether it's kind of writing along with first responders and fire and rescue units or law enforcement or the military. When you're going into some of these, the stakes literally are life and death. And there can't be higher stakes than that. You know, in a lot of formatted shows, like whether or not somebody goes and watches a ball drop and wins $1 million, or whether they get a rose and in a ring, there's you know no higher stakes than life and death. And it's funny. There's an old adage that people talk about. It's just TV. No one's going to die. And in these stories, that can happen. But the idea of second life was just undeniable, and that was kind of a phrase that was used a lot. At one point, it was even kind of an unofficial title of the project. So stakes. The characters, you just want to find compelling people, and there's basically two types of characters that we responded to in the story. Whether it was the amazing people like Dr. Menachem and Dr. Shaw and Dr. Karp and some of the other great doctors that we worked with and the staff, and then the procurement teams, whether it was Shelley, who has to kind of manage all of these people around the country and who's getting their organs, or then they kind of go to the one-on-one coordinators, you know, like Emily in our series, who have to be that lifeline person that speaks to you to say you're getting the organ. You know, the characters are incredibly important, but then it's the families who are going on this journey. So the combination of types of characters was amazing. We always look for relatability, and we kind of say that you know, vulnerability equals relatability, and there's nothing more vulnerable than having opening up to a camera being with you when you're going through one of the most incredibly difficult things that any family could go through. And lastly, one of the reasons, as Shannon was alluding to, that this project in particular was so great is it's just meaningful. There are some projects that you do that you're excited and maybe they're high profile for this, or you know, they're going to get great exposure for that, or they're going to go for 1 million episodes. But then there's ones that are just meaningful. And so when you can combine the compassion and the inspiration associated with a show like that, that's really what we look for. And, you know, this opportunity was incredible. As far as what makes a docudrama successful for us, I mean, obviously you can say ratings, eyeballs, viewership, you know, getting to 100 episodes, going to syndication, all that. But we also like to kind of go back to a quote that was given by Gary David Goldberg, who is the showrunner that created Family Ties and a lot of other amazing American mainstay scripted TV series, particularly about family. And he said, like, shows like these can succeed on 3 levels. Number one is you watch it and you are compelled and you say, you know, I want to spend time with these people. I want to return because I kind of feel like I want to be part of this family. Or when you can see the second level is like when you can see yourself, when you watch and you have an empathetic reaction to the people, and you know, I remember, and this is a personal moment for me, in our second episode, Rob and Lori Morris have to say goodbye and he gets wheeled away from her. And this moment always chokes me up even talking about it. I remember saying goodbye to my dad as he went down a hallway on a gurney. And that is just a moment where I think a lot of people have lived through that. And so when they watch these TV shows, they connect connect to that. And then that third level is when you can take something away from it and you can potentially learn from the people. So as far as the success, we like to look at that component of it, as opposed to just like, did we get a gajillion eyeballs? Did we do 5 seasons, et cetera, et cetera. And as far as what makes it different from our other shows, we do a lot of access-based programming, law enforcement, emergency medical services, fire and rescue. But we, you kind of have a production window and you then have to go along for the ride. And kind of in documentary programming, it's like, you have a story, I have a camera. Can I follow your story with my camera? And you have to go for the ride. And we just never had a project ultimately that faced the scale of the difficulties that we would kind of face with this show as it related to, and I can kind of speed up here, but basically, when you need to get people on board, and that was, Shannon's kind of incredible job in Hill to Climb. Hi, do you want cameras in the room to be able to tell the most difficult thing you're ever going to do? That's incredibly difficult. That's the hardest kind of casting challenge we've ever had. But with shooting at a hospital during a pandemic, you end up with production challenges, and when the case counts basically reached the place where we needed to put a halt in filming, it kind of really threw everything for a tumble that was a little bit different than any of the other COVID compromised kind of shows we were doing. And a little bit, those stories, you always want a beginning and a middle and an end. And the types of characters, the beginnings and the middles and the ends were so different and so disparate. And often those ends, if that person drops off the list or moved down the list, or we had to go away because of COVID and our cameras weren't there when their transplant happened, that sort of thing, that was like nothing that we had ever kind of attempted or dealt with. And that's one of the big achievements, I think, of the show is, being able to put some stories together that ended up with the elements, considering all those challenges.
Yeah, the world we live in the donation and transplant world, is you never know when you're going to get the transplant. And so that really does, create a lot of production challenges. Dr. Menachem, I want to bring you in here because this only it works because Shannon's had vision and great casting, and David had all of these, the stakes, the characters, and kind of this vision, but really because Vanderbilt gave an all access pass. This couldn't have happened without, without a transplant center taking the leap of faith to allow cameras in to actually film surgeries. Believe me, I've talked to a lot of transplant centers about filming, and I know what it takes. And this was sort of unprecedented. So I want to know from you, what did, when Vanderbilt was approached with the opportunity to do this, what made you guys say yes?
Well, I think the biggest overarching reason was that we felt it was important to get the messaging out there about the importance of organ donation, and to sort of spread ideas and explain to people what transplant is all about. And because it's a very important thing, for us, that we do this every day. I guess we don't always pay attention to what we're actually doing. And it's documentaries like this that actually allow other people to see what's going on and how the challenges that the patients deal with, their families deal with, and then beyond that, the gratitude to the donors. And so we thought that was really an important message to get across. For me personally, I think one of the big things, and the reason I didn't make the final decision, of course, but one of the reasons that I was agreeable to do this was, for most of us, we're not, I would say 99% of us are not super comfortable in front of a camera. Like, I didn't want to be a a TV person. And we never were made to feel that we were going to be acting, and we were going to do our jobs, and the cameras were going to be there. And because I would have felt super uncomfortable if I was told, like, here, talk to the patient this way, or you need to examine them this way. We just did our jobs and the cameras were there. So they probably had to do a lot more takes on my interviews because I probably said off-color things. But no, we pretty much did our jobs, and these guys did an amazing job telling the stories. And we were really proud to be involved, but also to see, it was kind of amazing to, so Joe Idle, who was the young man with Down syndrome. I mean, I'd dealt with him right from the beginning, but you don't really realize all that the going is on, right? You're like in the middle of it, and to stand back and sort of watch, it was amazing to see, and you realize like all the impact and the difficulties that he and his family went through. So it was pretty eye-opening.
Let me pick up on that. So when you watched the episodes back, because as the physicians, you're there, you know their medical charts, you know their medical histories, you know that they, what organs they need, but you don't see all of the behind the scenes with the family. So that's really interesting, that kind of watching it afterwards and seeing it all put together, that you get a different perspective of your patients from watching this.
Oh, for sure. I mean, to me, the one scene that was the most sort of eye-opening was when they filmed. Shelley and I were telling Joe that we had received organs for him and that he needed to come in. Shelley usually calls patients at home when the patients are in the hospital waiting. It's usually me, or it's people on my team, or the nurse practitioners, or whoever. And we don't really, we just tell people, and it's like, and then it becomes part of the process. Like, we tell them, and then our brains start working of, okay, what are we doing for immunosuppression? When are we changing them to the OR? What lines do they need? We never like stop and take a step back and look at it. And so like to see their faces at the time and see what they're dealing with and the emotions was pretty dramatic and pretty amazing. And even we don't usually do it via Zoom, but even while we were doing it via Zoom, while Shelley and I are having this conversation, both of our brains were not thinking about, wow, this is emotional, or wow, this is really cool, or this is life-changing. It was all about, okay, where are they going to go next, and how do we get them there, and what are the organs, when are they arriving? So it was sort of fascinating to step back and see what we do.
And that one call in particular, I think, is a great example of that. I'm going to butcher the French term, the raison d'etre, right? One of the main reasons why clients were interested in this show, and TLC, Discovery Plus, our partners, loved the idea of that moment when the person was going to get the life-saving call. And sometimes the patients, Shannon and the team, would get a chance to have someone say, I want to be, Vanderbilt managed whether or not anyone on the list wanted to participate in the program. And that was 1000% Vanderbilt. We didn't get to talk to anyone because obviously of the HIPAA and the confidentiality. But when it was presented, these people are interested, and we got to start, communicating with people. There were the people where we had enough of a long lead time where we could actually film with them before their transplant and get to know them. Joe's family was an example of that. And in those cases, ideally, we, had instituted ways where we could make sure that cameras were going to be able to be there for that call. And Jonathan, you have this, I can't remember whether you say, this is it or today's the day, but you have this moment in that call. And Peg in particular just loses it. It's Joe's mom. But it's just riveting. We have some characters say, oh my God, is this the call? But that moment when the call comes in, I think speaks to the stakes of how important organ transplant and signing up through Donate Life America is, because there are just so many people that do not get that call. And that call is a really, 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 really big deal. So that one in particular in that episode is super, super, super powerful. And yeah, I can't imagine what it's like to be able to give that call to somebody.
You know, when you're talking to transplant recipients, so one of the things I worked for the organ procurement organization in Los Angeles for many, many years, and I ran the volunteer program, and I did advanced speakers training and help people to develop their stories. And when you are working with transplant recipients, it almost, you know, there's a lot that focuses on how sick they were, but they always include where they were and how it felt when they got the call. And I do feel like Last Chance Transplant could have almost been called The Call, because it really, you know, in each of those stories, the emotion of the patient and of the family members and the, oh my gosh, is this it? Just really gets captured. Jonathan, you know, David said that you guys sort of sent out some information to your patients, to candidates who are waiting, letting them know that this opportunity was available. Were a lot of people interested in participating in the show? Did they really see the value and want to share their stories to help amplify and bring awareness to the cause?
At least all the patients I spoke to had interest in doing it. There was definitely, I mean, Joe's a special case. Joe loves the camera, but for the most part, people were hesitant about being on TV. But I think everybody was excited about the opportunity to be able to tell the story. So, yeah, I think you know, and what we did was, you know, we also tried to give the production team some ideas about patients we thought would be interesting for a variety of different reasons. So, you know, someone who needs a combined heart lung transplant in the setting of COVID. I mean, that's a big deal. You know, Joe, to our knowledge, is the first time an adult with Down syndrome has ever undergone a combined heart liver. So beyond talking about transplant now, you're also making the message even bigger, right? So in Joe's case, you're talking about congenital heart disease, you're talking about Down syndrome, and you're talking about transplantation. No, but I mean, the patients, and it's fascinating to see the community that builds between the transplant patients, and they're a very special group. I mean, you know, we take care of these patients all day long, and we have never been through what they've been through. And the people that have been transplanted, it's a small group of, you know, sort of the cool kids that know what it's like and they've survived. And they're always very proud to tell their story and do anything they can to help other patients out.
So Shannon, you've done so much casting on, and I'm sure you know, when David was talking about stakes and characters, you in casting are looking for those characters. You're looking for the people who are compelling, that you want to spend time with, people who you feel you can connect with, people you can take something away from. So when you had this group of people, of waiting list candidates, what was it that you were looking for, and what made you gravitate to the stories that you did?
I mean, my first week in casting, my first week in Nashville, starting to examine the stories that were coming through. I mean, the first thing, like David said, and like David said, you know, we're looking for compelling, like you're saying, compelling characters, compelling people who are willing to tell their story. Can they tell a story? Is their family willing to participate? It's a huge package to build something like that, you know? And like my first week there, I knew I was going to be up against a lot of things that either went my way or didn't go my way. And it was a lot of like timing. And, you know, there were patients that were willing to tell their story. I met with them. I talked with them. I was starting to kind of care for them and wanting to bring them into our family to tell their story. And they died. Right? So we face that a lot. A lot of people who are like circling the drain, ready to go, you know? So it's all about timing too. Would we be able to tell their story? Would we be able to capture the whole picture? Like David was saying, being able to have the luxury of going to someone's house and telling a little bit about who they were before coming into surgery, and then, you know, the results at the end. But I think we never knew like what we'd be up against or what we'd be facing. There's patients that weren't doing well through the process, but then came out flying, right? I mean,
yeah, it's interesting. A couple of when we were talking, Dr. Menachem, and we were talking about the call, and maybe the show could be called The Call. So one of the things that we learned was so many times that call is a bedside conversation, because the acuity of the person's illness, how sick they are, meant that they were in the hospital because they needed the hospital to be able to survive, and they were going to either get the organ or not. And this is one of the things that's so weird about it, is it's almost like the sicker they are, the more likely they were, and that's just such a weird dynamic. But two of the people, Kristen in our first episode, goes into cardiac arrest and has to go to the cath lab, and literally is so touch and go before she's able to get her heart. And then the other amazing patient, and Dr. Menachem, I know you were involved in this case, was Reverend Braxton. And he is, and this is why Vanderbilt was so amazing to work with, is there were some record cases, and I keep saying Dr. Braxton. Reverend Kenyatta Braxton was, as far as we understood during the time of COVID, the first double lung heart en bloc transplant. And Dr. Menachem, if you want to kind of talk about that one in particular, because
Sure.
That was a big deal. But they're in the hospital because they're so sick, and then they find out in the hospital, as opposed to they were waiting at home.
Yeah, it wasn't a traditional kind of casting that we would normally do, a casting call. It was literally finding patients that were able to tell their story or right on the cusp of having a transplant. Like, it was just a very odd experience for me, really, to be working in an environment like that. But look what we did.
That part must have really stunk for you guys, because we don't, we can't prepare anything. So it was funny when we were in the hospital, and the camera crews or whatever, and they're like, so when is this going to happen? You're like, that's not the way we work. Like, it doesn't. We're not trying to be unhelpful, but that's just not the way it works. Reverend Braxton, it's fascinating, and I think if you even just take it one step back, so the whole reason that he was able to get to Vanderbilt is because the hospital he was at before this, it was one of our previous heart failure fellows who was there and recognized how sick he was. He's now an attending heart failure transplant doc there, and said they weren't going to be able to do it, and called us and said, you got to help this guy. So the connections from an education standpoint and training, it's fascinating, right? How he sort of wound up here. Hopefully we don't do any more heart lung COVID cases, but heart lungs are not, a combined heart lung is just not that common now anyway, but he needed it. Was one of the few patients that wasn't going to survive without it. And I actually saw him in clinic about a month ago. He's doing great. So, his recovery was rough, as you can imagine. That's a major operation. And he was really sick going in, but he's done incredibly well.
Well, and that is one of the things that I loved about the show too. It didn't shy away from the fact that recovery is sometimes very difficult. And, my business partner is a transplant recipient, kidney pancreas recipient, and so many recipients, when they watch a television show and, the scripted shows, and you get an organ, and then they're bouncing up and they're walking the halls, and they're out of the hospital, and they're walking their daughter down the aisle or whatever. And the transplant recipients, still have some PTSD from what all they had to go through, how sick they got, and then how much time it took to recover. So really being able to see that these are very difficult, very complex surgeries, and that the kind of state of mind that someone has to have to go through it, not just the transplant, but the recovery afterwards. And, you know, you said that Reverend Braxton was doing well, and I lit up, which is a testament to, you know, Shannon and David and the casting, because I was truly invested in these people's lives. I really want to know how they're doing, and I really I cared. And yeah, when the woman went into cardiac arrest, I was like, oh my gosh, are they gonna, I actually was wondering if you were gonna show someone who didn't make it and not get her transplant. And I was really on the edge of my seat. So as a viewer who knows this world, there was a level of engagement in the folks that you got. And also I think the power and the importance, and this is something that transplant centers talk about with candidates, and one of the things that you have to have when you get listed is that support system and is the family. So Shannon, I'm sure too, you were looking at that family dynamic as you were looking at casting as well, and who was helping and supporting them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I had a patient just in the very beginning stages when we first arrived in Nashville, trying to get our bearings and figure out how it would work and look. You know, a patient was willing to do it, but then was concerned, do I not do it? Because what if I don't make it? And my family has to watch this story again, and I don't make it, you know? And I think, David, I think we were planning to show the full gamut of story. We were just very fortunate to have really great outcomes, but it's something we had discussed. Do we show that, you know, the truth of transplant? And we wanted to stay true to that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we ended up shooting 8 total transplants, 6 of which ended up in the show. And because there were a couple of those stories, again, where we just weren't able to capture those kind of endings. That's one of the things that I love so much about Joe's story is, you know, stories, sometimes you can put a little bow on it, and that's the sacrifice you make as a storyteller, is you know that we're putting a nice little bow on the TV show, but you know, you can never truly empathize with what those families went through. But Joe's story was an example where the viewer really did get to see a little bit more of the travails of how hard his family's journey was. And we actually were filming a discharge where in the TV show, you know, you see that he kind of comes out, but he ended up back in the hospital for even more time. And then we had very close conversations with Joe's parents and Team Idol. Check him out on Facebook. He's doing amazing, by the way. Because we needed to work through what the appropriateness level was going to be. And so we were in contact with them all the way until he basically got through getting out again, before we kind of felt comfortable showing an ending, you know, of him leaving. But, you know, and that's some of the, I'd say, scene work, but, you know, the content, Dr. Menachem, I know that you lived through with how tough it can be, because they get through the surgery, and I think Joe's an example of but it was all this other stuff, you know, that your physiognomy, you can fall prey to, and the trachea, and not just the tracheotomy and all that stuff. Do you want to maybe, how hard was that with Joe to live through? It was hard to watch.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, you know, we as physicians, we try to be sort of tough and try to separate our emotions and from the patients, but it doesn't work. I mean, you know, like, I mean, I've known Joe now for, I don't know, 3 years. I mean, this was a guy who, going back, had been counted out his entire life, right? And had been told by multiple centers that they weren't going to transplant him. Now, I don't know if that's because he was Down syndrome or maybe he was too high risk. I don't know. But I've always had a soft spot for Down syndrome patients. I think they're the toughest group of individuals going, because no one thinks they can do as much as they actually end up doing. And so you get really attached, and you want him to be successful. But we knew that the surgery was going to be really difficult. but we've got the best surgical team. I'm not a surgeon, so I can say this. My unbiased views, we got the best surgical team in the country. But we knew, though, that beyond that, it was going to be difficult because the Down syndrome patients have a lot of psychosocial issues that go along with being Down syndrome. And also their physiology is a little bit different. And he struggled with a lot of things, and it was tough to watch. We learned a lot now. I mean, now he's doing absolutely great. His mom just sent me a video of him boxing, which is great because I've boxed for over 20 years now. So I'm looking, next time I see him, I told him I'm bringing my gloves. But it was tough to watch on TV. It was definitely tough to be there and live that. And, his parents suffered, and they really did. And I think the show did a great job showing what they were dealing with. But I don't think, until you got to see them on a real day-to-day basis, I don't think anyone could ever imagine what that was like. But I mean, as a parent, to see your kid strapped to a bed and, not being able to talk and having a hard time breathing and can't walk, I mean, that's awful to watch. So, but they were strong. And, his parents, to be honest, his parents got him to where he was, in that, Joe was born in an era where most of these children with Down syndrome, when he was born, would not have gone through the operations that he did. And his parents pushed, and they made him try to be a normal kid. They didn't treat him differently. And then they helped, push him. They weren't going to be told no. And that's how they wound up at Vanderbilt. And, then he was transplanted. But yeah, no, it wasn't easy to watch. I mean, he was our patient, but he also becomes like your buddy, you sort of feel bad after a while.
Well, and even say, that you saw the video of him again, I'm so excited because I feel like I got to know Joe and his family and the struggles and, the physicians taking care of him. So that idea of the stakes in characters and why this show really works. It's funny, David, because I had never really thought about that. And when you put it in those terms, I'm like, oh, that's why we love this show, because it has the stakes and it has the characters. At the beginning, we talked about the fact that Rock and Robin Productions was also a part of this. And we see, how did that come about? How did that connection to Rock and Robin's Productions come to be?
Well, ultimately, along with the kind of, buckets of access and, the things that we do, that we excel at as a company and try and do a lot of, is celebrity and celebrity partnerships. And so whether it's being able to have them on camera and following Mark and Donnie Wahlberg around, as they kind of launch their restaurant franchise, or a lot of, once you start doing more and more of those, you get access to getting to meet more and more people. And we just got basically a meeting with Rock and Robin Productions, and we were working with the team over there, John Green and Rennie McAllister, and Dan Snook and Shannon just fostered that relationship, and it leads to meetings like, okay, what is Robin passionate about? What are you guys passionate about? And because in 2012 she was suffering from, I'm going to butcher this term, myelodysplastic syndrome, and MDS, and had her bone marrow transplant. When it was like a Venn diagram. Here's what we're working on over here. Here's what you guys are interested in, and then it was just like that's an incredible matchup. And then the parallel train of sealing everything up with the medical center and but her visibility and her passion was kind of that awesome nexus that then kind of leads to a sale, and people being like, oh yes, we want to put that on television, and that was kind of the make no mistake, Robin Roberts, Vanderbilt, that was kind of the, the thing that I think ultimately drove this thing home.
Yeah, and it was great to see her at the beginning, the first episode, and then she spoke with one of the recipients as well. So she kind of makes this appearance, and I think of all the recipients, transplant recipients or bone marrow, she's just been so vocal about the transformation and the difference that this made in her life and her gratitude. And that's what you hear from many transplant recipients as well, is just that very deep gratitude and that desire, continued desire to give back. So I'm guessing that when she heard about this idea, it fit with her desire to give back and be vocal about people's opportunity to give and to receive.
Yeah, and what was also really wonderful about it is when you kind of do projects like this, whether or not those auspices of that, what the celebrity kind of brings to the table, whether they're on camera, whether they're not on camera, but she and the team were very, very, very passionate. And we worked closely with the team at Discovery Plus TLC to like figure out what that was going to look like. Is it a series of just public service announcements? Is it, and it just became like, it needs to be like the start of the show and the end of the show, and like always being able to bookend with her, and then working with organizations, obviously like Donate Life America, again with the help of Vanderbilt, getting paired with them to be like, okay, what can that call to action be, to make sure that we get to throw to a place with a URL where you can then go to sign up to become an organ donor. And again, going back to what Dr. Menachem was saying, that really was the other major thing that drove everybody. It was just like, look, if one more person gives an organ that actually ends up being received and not rejected, and one more person gets second life because of a TV show,
we've left a mark on our community, right? We've left a message in our community. So.
Yeah, well, and the Trinity you were talking about is that third piece was take something away, right? So this is a show where you definitely take something away, both with a clear call to action, like I can do something today and register, and kind of take something away of how a yes, not how a death, but how a yes can transform not just an individual's life, but the life of their family and their community. And you really see those ripples here. Dr. Menachem, Vanderbilt is, leading heart program in America, and does a lot of innovative things. You've already talked about the fact that you have some of these patients who have gone to other centers and those centers can't help them, and Vanderbilt will. Are there some of the procedures and some of the innovations that Vanderbilt is pushing that you could talk about that are really helping to transform and save lives?
Sure. I think a lot of it too has to do with some of its location, and that we're sort of landlocked, which gives us access to more organs. So that definitely benefits patients in this region. I think internally we have, it sort of depends on leadership and what the goals also are of a transplant program. There's always two ways of going. When you have a death or you have a bad outcome with a transplant or a major surgery, you can go down that route of, we shouldn't be doing this. This is too high risk. Let's sort of shut this down. We've taken the other approach, and some of that has to do with the fact that we have, higher volume numbers, so we can absorb some bad outcomes. Because you have to remember too that, UNOS is, and the transplant community watches what our outcomes are, because you don't want centers that are not capable of having good outcomes doing transplants. But I think the other thing is that we have this mentality of wanting to do more high risk cases and take on as many patients as we can to help them out. And so what that's required a lot of, pre-transplant meetings and planning amongst the team to make sure that we're set up to have the best outcomes we can. So then on top of that, we've been aggressive with using, new therapies. We're doing we were the first to use hepatitis C organs, which is now Kelly Schlendorf, who's runs our group, and Dr. Lindenfeld led this effort. I mean, this has now become almost standard of care, but that's opened up the number of patients that were, or donors that we're getting. You know, we're also using now DCD hearts, so donors before brain death, which has been used in Europe and Australia for years. And this is, which sounds very strange. It's very difficult to explain how we're using a donor before brain death, but they don't meet the legal criteria for brain death based on a whole variety of medical criteria, but they have no neurologic function. And it's a little bit of semantics, probably too hard to get into here, but this is, again, has opened up a whole different number of organs for us. So, but I think it's just energy, and it's also just energy and drive. And this is what we like to do. And, you know, we have great patients that we like to do it for. So I think that's driven a lot of it.
DCD is complicated, but it is one of those things that I would love to see a scripted show take on as a storyline, because I feel like shows have started to at least say the patient is brain dead, and it's like, yay, that's a win, right? Yeah. They're not just like on life support, but they're on ventilated support, they're brain dead. But I do think DCD is really important because more and more families are getting approached under DCD. Yes. And so for families who are approached, and then sometimes you're approached about DCD, a family can give consent for DCD and then not expire, and then the donation can't go through. So there can be public confusion as well as just, you know, but that's, you know, I know DCD kidneys were being used at first and not the hearts. And so to be able to open up, you know, really when we have less than 1% of people who die in a way that allows for donation to occur, then every single potential donor becomes so important to maximize the number of organs through that way. And then the Hep C, I also think, is a really brilliant scripted television storyline. So it was great to see it on Last Chance Transplant as well, and to be able to, I remember I was at a conference and they were like, oh yeah, we can take Hep C organs and then just cure the Hep C. And I was like, this is amazing. So I think that's something also that people with hepatitis C may rule themselves out, thinking that they would not be able to be donors. So it was great to see that. And so people don't rule themselves out there. So yeah, innovation, you know, being the first of a lot of things, and obviously the first to open your doors for the public to see everything that you do on the face of transplantation. So on behalf of everyone, you know, in the donation community, thank you, Vanderbilt.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, I think, just to say, I mean, I think the TV show, I mean, it showed what we do in the hospital, but I think probably the best thing that the TV show did is, I mean, yes, it showed some surgeries and it talked to us about patients and saw us interacting with patients. But honestly, I think the best thing that the TV show did was the show wasn't about the physicians and the nurses. The show was about the patients and the families. And I think that's what really drives home the message, is that, I mean, that's why we come to work, right? That's why we do what we do, is to take care of these people. And I think that those storylines are what bring people in to say, holy cow, look what they're going through. You know, we need to support this community and we need to look into becoming donors. So, I mean, that was the amazing part.
Well, that sounds like the PSA to me. So brilliantly said. Thank you guys so much for, you know, I know that this was a difficult show to produce, and for on behalf of the donation community, we are just so grateful to you guys. As you know, you'll be getting a 2022 DLH Inspire Award this year. We give Inspire Awards to television shows, scripted and non-scripted documentaries, who tell authentic stories about organ, eye, and tissue donation. And there is no show ever created that tells a more authentic story of organ donation. So just thank you.
I'm humbled. Thank you for that.
Thanks for having us today.
Yeah. Well, good. I want to encourage everyone, if you have not, get Discovery Plus and watch the episodes. I'm a total binge watcher. And so I got through the episodes and I was like, what? Where are the more? I want more. I want more. So, and I don't really even like watching the non-scripted medical shows and about organ donation because it's so whatever, but watching this was so powerful. So I can't wait to award you guys all when we have our DLH Inspire Awards. And thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Appreciate you guys.